Dr. Amara Lewis had navigated every kind of turbulence the sky could throw at her, but nothing prepared her for Captain Elias Barrow blocking her path at the gate, looking her up and down, and questioning whether she belonged in the VIP line. The whispers spread fast, passengers assuming she was lying, cutting the line, pretending to be someone she wasn't, and when Elias publicly challenged her credentials for the third time, the entire cabin watched, waiting for her to break. But Captain Barrow had made one critical mistake. He didn't know that the quiet woman in jeans and a sweatshirt wasn't just another passenger. She was the director of the Federal Aviation Administration, and today he was about to learn exactly what happens when assumptions meet consequences. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The terminal hummed with the usual chaos of a Friday afternoon. Travelers rushed past with rolling suitcases, their faces buried in phones or fixed on departure boards. Gate 23B served a small regional carrier, the kind that connected mid-sized cities to major hubs with aging aircraft and tight schedules. Dr. Amara Lewis stood near the window, watching ground crews load luggage into the belly of the plane that would take her home. She looked nothing like a government director. Her dark jeans were worn at the knees, her gray sweatshirt faded from too many washes, and her natural hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. A canvas messenger bag hung from her shoulder, stuffed with conference materials she hadn't bothered to organize. After 3 days of international aviation meetings in Montreal, Amara had earned a right to dress down. The suits and pearls could wait until Monday. At 39, Amara had learned that power didn't need announcement. Her appointment as director of the Federal Aviation Administration had made headlines 6 months ago, but she deliberately kept a low profile since then. Too much attention brought too many assumptions. She preferred to watch, listen, and learn before making her presence known. Today was supposed to be simple. Catch her connecting flight, get home to Virginia, and spend the weekend reading reports in pajamas. Her phone buzzed with an email from her deputy. She scanned it quickly, typed a brief response, then tucked the phone back in her pocket. The FAA badge was there too, pressed against her hip in its leather case. She touched it briefly, a habit born from years of carrying identification that defined her. But today, she didn't want to be Director Lewis. She just wanted to be Amara, tired and ready to go home. The gate agent's voice crackled through the speakers. We'll now begin boarding for Flight 447 to Richmond. We'd like to invite our first-class passengers and those requiring special assistance to board at this time. Amara gathered her bag and moved toward the priority lane. A small plastic card in her wallet marked her as VIP, a courtesy extended to federal officials traveling on government business. She rarely used it, preferring to board with everyone else, but today her feet ached and her patience had worn thin. Priority boarding meant avoiding the crush of passengers fighting for overhead space. As she stepped into the priority line, she felt eyes on her. A woman in a business suit glanced her way, then whispered something to her companion. An older man in khakis frowned as Amara moved past. She'd felt this particular weight before, the silent question that followed her in spaces where people expected someone different, someone lighter, someone else. The whispers grew louder as she approached the podium. Is she supposed to be there? A voice murmured from the general boarding area. Another replied, probably thinks she's special. Amara kept her expression neutral, her shoulders relaxed. Years of navigating predominantly white professional spaces had taught her that reacting only confirmed their suspicions. Silence, she'd learned, was its own form of power. The gate agent, a young woman with blonde hair, pulled into a tight bun, looked up as Amara handed over her boarding pass. The agent's smile flickered, her eyes darting between the pass and Amara's face. This is for priority boarding, she said, her voice hesitant. I know, Amara replied evenly. The agent hesitated, glancing toward the jet bridge where a tall man in a pilot's uniform stood speaking with a flight attendant. Let me just verify something. She picked up a phone, her fingers fumbling with the handset. Amara waited, keeping her breathing steady. She knew this dance. The unnecessary verification, the extra scrutiny. The assumption that her presence in certain spaces required explanation. She could end it now by showing her badge, but something stubborn in her refused. She shouldn't have to prove herself just to board a plane. The pilot turned from his conversation, his eyes landing on Amara with immediate assessment. Captain Elias Barrow carried himself with the particular confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. His uniform was crisp, his graying hair perfectly styled, his jaw set in an expression that suggested he'd already made up his mind about whatever he was looking at. He strode toward the podium with purposeful steps, his shoes clicking against the terminal floor. "Is there a problem?" he asked the gate agent, though his eyes remained fixed on Amara. "No, sir, I was just—" the agent began. Elias stepped directly into Amara's path, positioning himself between her and the jet bridge entrance. His smile was polished but cold, the kind service workers give customers they don't quite trust. "Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right line?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Around them, other passengers had stopped to watch. Amara met his gaze without flinching, her voice calm and clear. "Yes, I'm sure. Priority boarding is for first-class passengers and our VIP members," Elias continued, as if explaining something complicated to a child. "The general boarding line is just over there." He gestured toward the crowded area where dozens of passengers waited. "I have priority boarding," Amara said, holding up her pass. Elias barely glanced at it. Instead, he looked her up and down, taking in her casual clothes, her worn sneakers, her simple appearance. His expression said everything his words didn't. "Right. Well, every day we have people who try to push their way to the front. I'm sure you understand we have to maintain order." The gate agent shifted uncomfortably, her hand still clutching the phone. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Amara could feel the stares of other passengers, could sense their judgment mixing with curiosity. Some probably thought she was causing a scene. Others might have recognized the injustice, but chose comfort over confrontation. A small voice cut through the tension. "Why is he talking to her like that?" Amara turned slightly to see a boy watching from a seat near the gate. He looked about 12, with brown skin and close-cropped hair, wearing a backpack decorated with military patches. His face showed confusion and something else, recognition of unfairness when he saw it. "Marcus, honey, mind your business," an elderly woman sitting nearby whispered, but the boy didn't look away. Elias cleared his throat, drawing Amara's attention back. He leaned toward the gate agent and muttered, just loud enough for Amara to hear, "Every single day, someone tries this." Then, louder, "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside so we can verify your boarding status." The gate agent's fingers trembled as she scanned Amara's pass again. The system beeped its approval, the same sound it had made for every other VIP passenger. She's cleared for priority boarding, Captain," the agent said quietly, her voice apologetic in a way that made Amara's stomach tighten. The apology wasn't for the delay. It was for existing in a space where she apparently didn't belong. Elias frowned, clearly unsatisfied with this resolution. He studied Amara's pass as if it might reveal itself as a forgery under sufficient scrutiny. Finally, with obvious reluctance, he stepped aside. "Fine. Go ahead. No apology." No acknowledgement of his error. Just permission granted, as if he were doing her a favor. Amara walked past him, her head high, her steps measured. The jet bridge stretched ahead, empty except for the sound of her footsteps. Behind her, she heard Elias speaking to the gate agent in a low voice, his tone dismissive. She didn't need to hear the words to know their meaning. The aircraft was small, maybe 70 seats, with worn upholstery and overhead bins that had seen better days. First class consisted of 8 seats in 2 rows, larger than the economy seats but not by much. Amara found her seat by the window in row 2 and settled in, placing her bag under the seat in front of her. Through the window, she watched the ground crew work. A man guided a fuel truck into position. Another checked the landing gear. These were the people who kept aviation safe, the mechanics and technicians whose work happened in the shadows while pilots got the glory. Amara knew every role mattered, from the person who swept the hangar floor to the person who filed flight plans. Respect shouldn't be reserved for uniforms and titles. Excuse me. A flight attendant appeared beside her seat, her smile tight. Can I get you anything to drink before takeoff? Water would be great. Thank you, Amara replied. The attendant nodded and moved away. Amara heard her speaking to another crew member near the galley, their voices low but audible. That's her. The one the captain stopped at the gate. A pause. I don't know. Some kind of issue with her boarding pass, I guess. Amara closed her eyes briefly, fighting the exhaustion that came from being constantly scrutinized. She'd spent the last 3 days in meetings with aviation officials from 12 countries, discussing safety protocols and international regulations. She presented findings on pilot fatigue and argued for stricter training standards. She defended her positions against skepticism and pushback, maintaining composure even when her expertise was questioned. And now, on a regional flight home, she had to defend her right to sit in a seat she'd been assigned. More passengers began boarding. A businessman in an expensive suit took the seat in row 1 across the aisle, setting his leather briefcase on the seat beside him. He glanced at Amara, his eyes lingering for a moment before he pulled out his phone. Something in his expression suggested recognition, but he said nothing. The boy from the gate appeared in the aisle, struggling with a backpack that seemed too large for him. He spotted Amara, and his face brightened. "You made it on," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I did," Amara replied warmly. "Looks like we're neighbors." The boy checked his boarding pass, then slid into the seat across the aisle from her in row 3. "I'm Marcus," he said, extending his hand with formal politeness that seemed beyond his years. "Amara." She shook his hand, noting the firmness of his grip. "Traveling alone? Going to visit my mom. She's stationed at Fort Lee." Pride filled his voice. "She flies helicopters. Black Hawks. That's impressive," Amara said, and meant it. "Must be exciting having a pilot for a mom." "It's pretty cool," Marcus admitted. "She says the most important thing about flying is respecting the machine and the people who depend on you." He paused, his expression growing serious. That captain at the gate, he wasn't very respectful. Before Amara could respond, a voice echoed through the cabin from the forward galley. "Did you see how she tried to cut the line? Unbelievable." The speaker was a middle-aged woman settling into row 5, her voice carrying despite her attempt at discretion. "Some people think they're more important than everyone else." Her companion, a man in a polo shirt, nodded agreement. "Probably pulled strings somehow. My wife works for an airline. She says people try to scam VIP status all the time." Amara felt Marcus tense beside her. The boy's hands curled into fists, his jaw tight. She caught his eye and gave a small shake of her head. "It's okay," she mouthed. But it wasn't okay. It was the accumulation of 1,000 small cuts, each one leaving a mark invisible to everyone but those who bore them. It was being questioned in spaces where others moved freely. It was having your credentials doubted, your presence challenged, your worth measured by appearance rather than achievement. The businessman in row 1 shifted in his seat, turning slightly toward the gossiping passengers. His expression had hardened, his earlier neutrality replaced with something that looked like disapproval. But like Amara, he remained silent, watching the scene unfold without intervention. More passengers filed past, their carry-ons bumping against seats. A few glanced at Amara with curiosity, their minds clearly working through the scene they'd witnessed at the gate. She could see them trying to reconcile her casual appearance with her VIP status, their confusion written plainly on their faces. Through the cockpit door, left open during boarding, Amara could see Elias Barrow settling into the captain's seat. A woman with dark hair pulled into a low bun sat beside him in the first officer's position, her movements efficient as she checked instruments and reviewed paperwork. Their voices drifted into the cabin, Elias' tone carrying an edge of irritation. "Entitled passengers thinking they can push their way to the front," he said, making no effort to keep his voice down. "It's gotten worse every year. Everyone wants special treatment." The first officer, whose name tag read Dana Whitlock, glanced toward the cabin, her expression unreadable. "She had a valid boarding pass, Elias," she said quietly. "That's not the point," he replied. "The point is maintaining standards." The moment you let people bend the rules, everyone thinks they can do it. Dana's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing more. Her silence spoke volumes, suggesting this wasn't the first time she'd heard Elias make such comments, and probably wouldn't be the last. She returned her attention to the flight checklist, her shoulders rigid with tension. The flight attendant who'd taken Amara's drink order reappeared with a plastic cup of water. She set it on the tray table with a tight smile, then hurried away before Amara could thank her. The crew's discomfort was palpable, each of them moving through the cabin with forced cheerfulness that didn't quite mask their unease. As the final passengers boarded, the woman who'd been gossiping earlier made her way to the lavatory at the front of the cabin. As she passed Amara's row, she stumbled slightly, catching herself on the armrest. "Oh, excuse me," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Didn't see you there." Amara met her eyes steadily. "No problem." The woman continued to the lavatory, and Marcus leaned across the aisle. "That wasn't an accident," he whispered. "Probably not," Amara agreed. "But responding to rudeness with more rudeness doesn't solve anything." "So what do you do?" Marcus asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Amara considered the question. "You remember who you are. You remember why you're here. And you don't let other people's assumptions change how you see yourself." Marcus nodded slowly, processing her words. "My mom says something similar. She says when people underestimate you, they give you an advantage." "Your mom sounds very wise," Amara said. The businessman in row 1 turned in his seat, making brief eye contact with Amara. Something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement. He'd been watching, listening, understanding. But like Amara, he was waiting, measuring the situation before deciding how to respond. His patience suggested experience with moments like these. The cabin door closed with a heavy thunk, sealing them all inside. A flight attendant moved through the aisles checking seatbelts and overhead bins. The intercom crackled to life with a pre-recorded safety announcement, the voice cheerful and automated. Through the cockpit door, now partially closed, Amara watched Dana going through her checklist with methodical precision. The first officer's competence was evident in every movement, her hands steady on the controls. Elias, by contrast, seemed distracted, his attention divided between the instruments and something on his phone. As the plane began its pushback from the gate, the intercom crackled again. This time, Elias' voice filled the cabin, smooth and authoritative. "Good afternoon, folks. This is Captain Barrow speaking. Welcome aboard Flight 447 with service to Richmond. We're looking at clear skies and smooth air today, so we should have you on the ground, right on schedule." He paused, and Amara could have sworn she heard a hint of smugness creep into his tone. "We do appreciate everyone's patience during our minor complications at the gate. Keeping everything running smoothly requires cooperation from all our passengers." Several heads turned toward Amara. The message was clear. She had been the complication, the delay, the problem that required patience from everyone else. Marcus' face flushed with anger. Amara reached across the aisle and touched his arm gently. "It's okay," she said softly. But Marcus shook his head. "It's not fair. You didn't do anything wrong." "You're right," Amara agreed. "But fairness isn't always immediate. Sometimes it takes time to reveal itself." In the cockpit, Dana shot Elias a sharp look, her mouth set in a hard line. She said something Amara couldn't hear, but Elias waved her off dismissively, his attention already moving to the next task. The plane taxied toward the runway, its engines building to a steady rumble. Amara watched the terminal slide past her window, thinking about the conference she'd just left. She'd sat in rooms full of aviation professionals, most of them men, most of them white, and she'd commanded respect through expertise and quiet authority. She'd made decisions that would affect millions of travelers, signed policies that would shape the industry for years to come. And yet here, dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, without her title and credentials on display, she was just another black woman whose presence required explanation. The businessman in row 1 caught her eye again. This time, he gave a small nod, as if acknowledging something unspoken between them. Amara returned the gesture. He knew who she was, or at least suspected. His recognition was subtle but certain. The engines roared as the plane reached the runway threshold, but before they could begin their takeoff roll, the aircraft suddenly slowed and came to a stop. The intercom clicked on, Elias' voice filling the cabin with forced casualness. "Folks, we're going to have a brief delay here. Air traffic control needs us to hold for a moment. We'll be on our way shortly." Amara watched through the window as another aircraft passed overhead on approach. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. But in the cabin, the pause created restless energy. Passengers shifted in their seats, checking watches and phones. Elias emerged from the cockpit, his expression businesslike, but his eyes carrying that same edge of authority from the gate. He scanned the cabin as if conducting an inspection, his gaze settling on occupied seats with the assessment of someone looking for problems. "Folks, while we're holding, I need to address a quick seating concern," he announced, moving down the aisle. His path led him directly toward Amara's row, his stride purposeful. He stopped beside her seat, looking down with that same controlled smile from earlier. "Ma'am, I need to verify something. Are you sure you're supposed to be in this seat?" The cabin went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every passenger turned to watch. Amara looked up at him, her expression calm despite the heat rising in her chest. "Yes, I'm sure. I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again," Elias said, his voice loud enough to carry. "We've had some issues today with seating assignments, and I want to make sure everything is correct before we take off." The implication was clear. She was the issue. She was the mistake that needed correcting. Amara reached into her bag and pulled out not just her boarding pass, but the small leather wallet that held her VIP card. She handed both to Elias without a word. Around her, passengers leaned forward, craning their necks to see what would happen next. Elias took the items with theatrical slowness, examining them as if they were documents requiring forensic analysis. He held the VIP card up to the light, turned it over, studied the magnetic strip. His performance was deliberate, designed to suggest he was doing his job with exceptional thoroughness rather than targeting one passenger with suspicion. Dana appeared at the cockpit door, her face tight with frustration. "Elias," she called, her voice sharp with warning. "Let it go." He waved her off without looking back, his attention fixed on Amara's credentials. "Just being thorough, Dana. Safety and security, remember?" Marcus, across the aisle, had gone rigid in his seat. His hands gripped the armrest, knuckles pale. Amara could see him fighting the urge to speak, his young sense of justice warring with his uncertainty about how to intervene. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step into the aisle for a moment," Elias said, handing back her boarding pass but keeping the VIP card. "There's something I need to verify with the gate." "I'm not stepping anywhere," Amara replied, her voice level but firm. "I'm in my assigned seat with valid credentials. If you have a question about them, you can verify from where you're standing." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Some passengers looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Others watched with undisguised interest, treating the confrontation like entertainment. The middle-aged woman from row 5 spoke up, her voice carrying false concern. "Captain, if there's a security issue, shouldn't we make sure everything is proper? Better safe than sorry, right?" Her companion nodded eagerly. "Absolutely. In this day and age, you can't be too careful." Elias seized on their support like a lifeline. "Exactly. We all want a safe flight, which means following proper procedures." He looked down at Amara again, his smile hardening. "So I'll ask one more time, ma'am. Please step into the aisle." "And I'll answer one more time," Amara said, her words crisp and clear. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Dana strode down the aisle, her patience clearly exhausted. She stopped beside Elias, her voice dropping to a sharp whisper that still carried to nearby passengers. "This is inappropriate, and you know it. She has valid credentials. You verified them at the gate. This needs to stop now." "I'm the captain of this aircraft," Elias replied, his voice rising, "and I'll decide what procedures are necessary for the safety of everyone on board." "This isn't about safety," Dana shot back. "And we both know it." The businessman in row 1 stood abruptly, drawing everyone's attention. He was tall, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. "Captain Barrow, Perhaps you should consider that you're creating the very disruption you claim to be preventing. Elias turned to him, surprise flickering across his face. Sir, I appreciate your concern, but Richard Langford, the man said, extending his hand, which Elias reflexively shook. I sit on the board of 3 major airlines. I also happen to know Ms. Lewis professionally. He emphasized her name deliberately, watching for recognition that didn't come. Elias frowned. That's nice, sir, but company policy. Your company policy doesn't require you to repeatedly challenge a validated VIP passenger, Richard interrupted smoothly. In fact, I'm fairly certain it requires quite the opposite. Now, unless you have a legitimate operational concern, I suggest we all return to our seats so this flight can depart. The cabin had gone completely still. Even the gossiping woman had fallen silent, her earlier confidence deflating. Elias' jaw worked, his face flushing. He looked at Amara's VIP card in his hand, then back at her face. Whatever he saw there must have finally penetrated his assumptions, because something shifted in his expression. Not understanding, but uncertainty. Fine, he said finally, his voice tight. He dropped the VIP card onto Amara's tray table rather than handing it to her. Everything appears to be in order. But in the future, having proper documentation visible would prevent these kinds of delays. He turned on his heel and strode back toward the cockpit, his shoulders rigid. Dana remained in the aisle for a moment longer, her eyes meeting Amara's with something that looked like an apology mixed with shame. I'm sorry, Dana said quietly, so only Amara could hear. That wasn't right. No, it wasn't, Amara agreed. But you spoke up. That matters. Dana nodded and returned to the cockpit. Through the partially open door, Amara could see her speaking to Elias in sharp, clipped tones. His responses were equally heated, but the door closed before she could hear more. Marcus leaned across the aisle, his voice trembling with anger. That was so wrong. Why did he keep doing that? You showed him your pass already. Sometimes people see what they expect to see rather than what's actually there, Amara said gently. They make assumptions based on how someone looks instead of who they actually are. That's stupid, Marcus declared with the blunt honesty of youth. It is, Amara agreed, but it's also reality. The question is what we do about it. Richard Langford settled back into his seat, but not before pulling a business card from his wallet. He stood and walked back to Amara's row, extending the card. I meant what I said. If you need a witness to what happened here, you call me. Amara took the card, noting the elegant lettering. Richard Langford, Strategic Aviation Consulting. On the back, he'd written in neat script, I'll vouch when you decide it's time. Thank you, she said simply. He returned to his seat as the engines roared to life again. The plane began to move, finally cleared for takeoff. Amara tucked Richard's card into her bag, next to her badge, these 2 pieces of evidence side by side. A flight attendant moved through the cabin one final time, checking that everything was secure. When she reached Amara's row, she paused. I'm sorry about the delay, she said, her voice barely audible. Sometimes things get complicated. It's not your fault, Amara replied. But as the attendant moved away, Amara heard her whisper to a colleague near the galley. Did you see what just happened? We need to write that up. The other attendant nodded, glancing toward the cockpit with worry. He's done this before. Always with someone he decides doesn't belong. Their words carried just far enough for Amara to hear, confirming what she'd already suspected. This wasn't an isolated incident or a simple misunderstanding. It was a pattern, a habit, a choice Elias made repeatedly with passengers he deemed unworthy of the space they occupied. The plane accelerated down the runway, engines screaming. Amara felt the familiar lift as the wheels left the ground, that moment of suspension between earth and sky. Usually, it filled her with a sense of possibility. Today, it just felt like the inevitable continuation of a conflict that had started the moment she'd walked into the terminal. As they climbed through the clouds, the intercom crackled one more time. Elias' voice came through, smooth and professional, as if the last 20 minutes hadn't happened. Folks, we've reached our cruising altitude of 28,000 feet. Looks like smooth sailing from here. Flight attendants, you're free to move about the cabin. Smooth sailing. The words would have been funny if they weren't so darkly ironic. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Around the cabin, passengers began to relax, pulling out books and tablets, adjusting their seats. The tension gradually dissipated for everyone except those who understood what they'd witnessed. Marcus remained alert, watching Amara with concern. Richard Langford opened his laptop but kept glancing back, his earlier neutrality replaced with protective vigilance. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with forced smiles, their earlier whispered conversation still hanging in the air. And in the cockpit, visible through the occasional opening of the door, Dana and Elias sat side by side in rigid silence. Whatever words they'd exchanged after his confrontation with Amara had created a chasm between them, one that wouldn't easily be bridged. Amara pulled out her leather notebook, the one she carried everywhere, and opened to a blank page. She wrote 3 words in careful script: observe, listen, remember. Then she added a 4th: document. The flight was less than an hour long. Already, 20 minutes had passed. By the time they landed in Richmond, this would be over. Elias would disembark, probably congratulating himself on maintaining order. Most passengers would forget the incident before they reached baggage claim. But Amara wouldn't forget, and neither would Marcus, Richard, Dana, or the flight attendants who'd seen this pattern before. Outside her window, the sky stretched endlessly in all directions, brilliant blue and cloud-dotted. Somewhere up here, Amara thought, the rules were supposed to be simple. Physics didn't care about race or gender or assumptions. An aircraft flew because of lift and thrust, drag and weight. The fundamentals of aviation were pure, absolute, indifferent to everything except the laws of nature. But the people who flew the aircraft, who filled the seats, who made the rules and enforced them, they brought all their biases and prejudices with them, 30,000 feet above the ground. The plane hit a patch of light turbulence, bouncing gently. Amara's water sloshed in its cup. Marcus gripped his armrests, then relaxed when the ride smoothed out. First time flying? Amara asked. No, I fly all the time to see my mom, Marcus replied. But I never saw anything like what happened today. Then you've been lucky, Amara said. A lot of people aren't. Will you report him? Marcus asked. The captain, I mean. Amara considered the question carefully. What do you think I should do? Marcus thought for a moment, his young face serious. My mom says if you see something wrong and don't speak up, you're part of the problem. But she also says you have to pick your battles, because you can't fight every fight. Your mom is very wise, Amara said again. So which do you think this is? A battle worth fighting? Yeah, Marcus said without hesitation. Because if he did it to you, he'll do it to someone else. Maybe someone who doesn't have people to stick up for them, like Mr. Langford did for you. Amara smiled, impressed by his insight. That's exactly right. Sometimes we fight not just for ourselves, but for everyone who comes after us. She looked down at her notebook, at those 4 words she'd written. The page would fill with more notes before this flight ended. She was certain. Every detail mattered. Every witness counted. Every piece of evidence will be necessary. Because Captain Elias Barrow had made a choice today, one he probably thought was insignificant. He'd seen a black woman in casual clothes and decided she didn't belong in VIP. He'd challenged her credentials, questioned her presence, and made a spectacle of his suspicion. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known because he'd never bothered to look beyond his assumptions, was that Amara Lewis was exactly the person who could hold him accountable. The FAA badge rested in her pocket, warm against her hip. She hadn't needed to use it yet. Part of her hoped she wouldn't have to. But as the flight continued, and she watched the crew move through their duties, as she saw Dana's stiff posture and heard Elias' self-satisfied voice over the intercom, Amara knew that hope was fading. Some lessons could only be taught through consequences. And some people only learned when authority they respected forced them to look at their own behavior with honest eyes. The clouds parted below, revealing patchwork fields and winding rivers. They'd be descending soon, beginning their approach to Richmond. The flight would end, passengers would scatter, and life would continue. But for Captain Elias Barrow, Amara thought, the real turbulence was just beginning. He just didn't know it yet. The aircraft leveled off at cruising altitude, the engines settling into a steady hum that usually brought Amara comfort. Today, that sound just reminded her of how much longer she'd be trapped in this aluminum tube with a captain who'd already demonstrated his character. She closed her notebook and stared out the window, watching the landscape shrink below. The intercom crackled, breaking the relative peace that had settled over the cabin. Dana's voice came through, professional and clear. "Captain, we're receiving updated routing instructions from air traffic control. There's restricted airspace ahead due to military exercises." A pause, then Elias' voice, irritated and loud enough to carry into the cabin through the open cockpit door. "What? Since when? Nobody told us about this during briefing." "It's a recent activation," Dana replied evenly. "I'm adjusting our course now. Should add about 8 minutes to our flight time." Through the gap in the cockpit door, Amara could see Elias lean forward in his seat, his shoulders tense. His voice rose, frustration bleeding through. "The FAA changes rules every single day. Half of them don't even make sense. They sit in their offices making decisions without understanding what it's like up here." Dana's response was quieter, measured. "Some of those decisions save lives, Elias." "Yeah, and some of them are just bureaucrats justifying their paychecks," he shot back. Amara's jaw tightened. She'd spent years in aviation, first as an engineer, then in regulatory roles, working her way up through determination and expertise. Every regulation she'd helped craft came from accident investigations, near misses, and hard lessons written in blood. The idea that people like Elias dismissed that work as bureaucratic nonsense made her anger burn hotter. Marcus glanced at her, picking up on her tension. "You okay?" he whispered. She managed a small smile. "Just listening." The plane banked slightly as Dana executed the course correction. Her handling was smooth, professional, the kind of flying that came from genuine skill rather than just accumulated hours. Amara recognized excellence when she saw it. Dana Whitlock was a pilot who understood that aviation demanded respect. Respect for the machine, the weather, the regulations, and the people whose lives depended on her decisions. Elias, by contrast, seemed to view flying as an extension of his ego. Amara had met plenty of pilots like him over the years. They were competent enough to pass their check rides, experienced enough to command aircraft, but they lacked the humility that separated good pilots from great ones. They believed their experience made them infallible, their authority absolute. A flight attendant appeared beside Richard Langford's seat in row 1, speaking quietly. Richard nodded, then stood and made his way down the aisle toward Amara. He paused at a row, keeping his voice low. "Mind if I sit for a moment?" "Go ahead," Amara replied, gesturing to the empty seat beside her. Richard settled in, his expression thoughtful. "I want you to know something. I've flown over 2 million miles in my career. I've seen a lot of things at 30,000 feet, but what happened today was beyond the pale." "Unfortunately, it's not as rare as it should be," Amara said. "No, it's not," Richard agreed. "But here's what makes this different. I know your last name. I know your position. And I suspect you have the power to do something about this." He paused, studying her face. "The question is whether you will." Amara met his gaze steadily. "You're very perceptive, Mr. Langford." "Richard, please." "And perceptive comes with the territory when you've spent 30 years in aviation consulting." He smiled slightly. "I've sat in enough FAA meetings to recognize the name Dr. Amara Lewis when I see it on a VIP manifest. And yet you said nothing at the gate," Amara observed. "Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is watch how situations unfold," Richard said. "If I'd intervened immediately, Barrow might have backed down without revealing his true character. But now we've all seen exactly who he is when he thinks no one important is watching." A soft chime interrupted them. The intercom clicked on again, Dana's voice calm but firm. "Captain, we're getting an automated systems alert. Hydraulic pressure fluctuation in the secondary system. Nothing critical, but worth monitoring." Elias' response was sharp. "I see it. It's probably just a sensor glitch. We've had issues with that gauge before. Still protocol to document it," Dana said, I know the protocol, Dana. I've been flying these routes while you were still in flight school. The exchange hung in the air, heavy with condescension. Richard shook his head slowly. That man has no idea how close he is to the edge. No, Amara agreed. He really doesn't. Richard stood, preparing to return to his seat. Whatever you decide to do, Dr. Lewis, you have at least one witness who will tell the truth about today. He paused. Actually, make that several. I noticed the young man across from you has been paying very close attention. After Richard returned to row 1, Amara pulled out her phone. The aircraft's Wi-Fi was functional, and a notification waited from her deputy at the FAA. She opened it, expecting routine updates. Instead, she found an automated alert that made her pause. The notification detailed the minor hydraulic issue Dana had just reported. Standard procedure required all system anomalies to be logged in real time, creating a digital record that fed into FAA monitoring systems. What caught Amara's attention was the aircraft's maintenance history. This particular plane had experienced 3 similar hydraulic alerts in the past month, all logged, none resulting in formal maintenance action beyond sensor checks. Dana was following protocol perfectly. Elias was dismissing a pattern that deserved attention. Amara made a note in her phone. This wasn't directly related to today's discrimination, but it painted a broader picture of a captain who cut corners, trusted his instincts over procedure, and dismissed valid concerns from his first officer. The cabin remained quiet as passengers settled into the rhythm of the flight. Some read, others dozed, a few worked on laptops. The woman from row 5 who'd been so quick to support Elias earlier now seemed focused on her phone, occasionally glancing toward Amara with an expression that might have been embarrassment. Marcus pulled out a book, but kept stealing glances at the cockpit. "Do you fly?" he asked Amara suddenly. "Not as a pilot," she replied, "but I've spent a lot of time in cockpits, learning how everything works." "What do you do?" Marcus asked with the direct curiosity of youth. Amara considered her answer carefully. "I work in aviation safety, making sure flights like this one follow the rules that keep everyone safe." "Cool," Marcus said, impressed. "So you know all about this stuff? Like what that hydraulic thing was about?" "I do," Amara confirmed. "It's usually not dangerous, but it needs to be checked properly. Good pilots take even small warnings seriously." "And bad pilots?" Marcus asked. "Bad pilots assume they know better than the instruments," Amara said. "They trust their experience over evidence. And sometimes that works out fine. But sometimes it doesn't, and that's when people get hurt." Through the cockpit door, she could see Dana working through a checklist, her movements precise. Elias seemed distracted, his attention drifting to his phone between glances at the instruments. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. A flight attendant approached the cockpit, speaking briefly with Dana before returning to the galley. Amara caught the attendant's eye as she passed, noting the worry creasing the woman's forehead. Something was happening beyond the passenger's awareness. Tensions building in the confined space of the cockpit. The plane hit a patch of turbulence. Nothing severe, but enough to rattle cups and cause a few nervous murmurs. Dana's voice came over the intercom immediately. "Folks, we're experiencing some light chop. Nothing to worry about, but please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Elias added his own announcement moments later, his tone carrying an edge. "And for those in the VIP section who aren't used to this kind of flying, turbulence is completely normal. No need for concern." Marcus' eyes widened. "Did he just—" "Yes," Amara said quietly. "He did." Richard Langford turned in his seat, catching Amara's eye. His expression said everything. This man is digging his own grave, and he doesn't even realize he's holding the shovel. In the cockpit, Dana's body language had shifted from professional to rigid. She said something to Elias that Amara couldn't hear, but the sharpness of Dana's movement spoke volumes. The first officer had reached her limit. The turbulence smoothed out as they adjusted altitude. Amara watched clouds slide past her window, thinking about all the flights she'd taken over the years, all the pilots she'd observed, all the times she'd seen small acts of prejudice dismissed as insignificant. Each incident alone might seem minor, easy to excuse or ignore, but accumulated over time, across thousands of passengers, They created a culture where certain people never felt fully welcome in spaces they had every right to occupy. She'd heard the arguments before. It was just a misunderstanding. He was following procedure. You're being too sensitive. Not everything is about race. The defenses piled up, insulating people like Elias from accountability, allowing patterns to continue unchallenged. But Amara wasn't just any passenger. She had the authority to demand accountability. The question Richard had posed lingered in her mind. Would she use it? Her hand moved to her coat pocket, fingers brushing the leather case that held her badge. The FAA director's credentials represented more than personal authority. They represented every person who'd been dismissed, doubted, or demeaned in spaces where they belonged. Every time someone like Elias made assumptions based on appearance, he didn't just insult one passenger. He reinforced a system that told entire groups of people they were perpetual outsiders. The flight attendant returned to the galley, whispering urgently with her colleague. Their eyes kept darting toward the cockpit, then toward Amara. Recognition was spreading, pieces falling into place. The crew was beginning to understand that today's incident wasn't just another passenger complaint they could quietly document and file away. Amara opened her notebook again and began writing. She documented the timeline precisely. Elias' initial challenge at the gate, his public questioning in the cabin, his dismissive comments over the intercom, his casual reference to VIP passengers not used to flying. She noted Dana's repeated attempts to check his behavior, the flight attendant's discomfort, Richard's intervention, and Marcus witnessed to it all. Evidence. That's what separated complaints from accountability. And Amara was building a comprehensive record that no airline legal team could dismiss as misunderstanding or miscommunication. The seatbelt sign dinged off again as they entered smoother air. A flight attendant made her way to the galley at the rear of the cabin, and Amara noticed her pause to speak with another crew member. Their conversation was brief but intense, punctuated by glances toward row 2 where Amara sat. Moments later, the same attendant approached Dana in the cockpit, leaning in to whisper something. Through the gap in the door, Amara saw Dana's eyes widen, her head turning sharply toward the attendant. The attendant nodded, confirming whatever question Dana had asked. Dana's shoulders sagged slightly, and she closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, she looked directly through the cockpit door toward Amara. Their eyes met across the cabin, and understanding passed between them. Dana knew now. She knew exactly who had witnessed Elias' behavior. The first officer turned to her captain, speaking quietly but urgently. Elias waved her off without looking away from his instruments, clearly annoyed by whatever Dana was saying. His dismissiveness was automatic, habitual, the response of someone who'd spent years believing his authority made him right by default. Dana persisted, her voice rising enough that fragments reached Amara's ears. Need to understand, not just any passenger. Serious implications. Elias finally turned to face her, his expression irritated. Dana, I don't care if she's the Queen of England. I did my job. I verified her credentials. If she has a problem with proper security procedures, that's her issue, not mine. It wasn't proper procedure, Dana said, her voice sharp enough now to carry clearly into the cabin. It was targeted harassment, and you know it. Several passengers looked up at the raised voices. The woman from row 5 shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Richard Langford had gone very still, listening intently. That's enough, Elias snapped. We can discuss this after we land. Right now, I need you focused on flying this aircraft. I'm focused, Dana replied coldly. I've been focused this entire flight while you've been busy making announcements designed to humiliate a passenger who did nothing wrong. Marcus leaned across the aisle, his voice barely a whisper. She's standing up to him. Yes, she is, Amara replied quietly. That takes courage. In the cockpit, Elias had turned his attention back to his instruments, his jaw tight. Dana pulled out her phone, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. She was documenting too, Amara realized, creating her own record of today's events. Richard Langford stood and walked back to Amara's row again, this time carrying his business card holder. He extracted a card and wrote something on the back before handing it to her. That's my personal cell, he said. When this inevitably becomes an investigation, you'll need witnesses who saw everything. I'm volunteering. Thank you, Amara said, accepting the card. Can I ask why you're willing to put yourself in the middle of this? Richard's expression grew serious. Because I've sat in too many boardrooms where executives dismiss complaints about crew behavior as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. I've watched patterns get buried under legal settlements and non-disclosure agreements. Someone needs to be willing to stand up and say, I saw it or recognized it for what it was, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. He glanced toward the cockpit. That captain doesn't just have an attitude problem. He has a pattern, and patterns like his cost airlines millions in lawsuits and lost customers. More importantly, they cost real people their dignity. If I can help stop that, I will. After Richard returned to his seat, a middle-aged man from row 4 approached Amara hesitantly. He was white, dressed in business casual, with a laptop bag slung over his shoulder. Excuse me, he said quietly. I need to apologize. Amara looked up, surprised. For what? For not saying anything, he replied, his discomfort evident. At the gate, and then again in the cabin when the captain was questioning you. I knew it wasn't right, but I told myself it wasn't my business. That maybe I was misreading the situation. He paused, meeting her eyes. But I wasn't misreading it. I knew exactly what was happening, and I chose comfort over doing the right thing. I am sorry. I appreciate that, Amara said. Taking responsibility for our silence is important. The man nodded. If you need someone to corroborate what happened, I'll do it. It's the least I can do. He returned to his seat, and Amara noted his seat number in her notebook. Another witness. Another piece of evidence. The wall of silence that usually protected people like Elias was crumbling. The intercom crackled to life. Dana's voice came through, professional despite the tension. Folks, we're beginning our initial descent into Richmond. We should be on the ground in about 20 minutes. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and tray tables are up and locked. Elias added his own announcement, his tone forcefully cheerful. Hope everyone enjoyed the flight today. For those keeping score, we're actually going to arrive 5 minutes early despite our earlier delay. Not bad for crew that some folks might think doesn't know what they're doing. The dig was barely veiled, his wounded pride seeping through his professional facade. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. He just can't stop, can he? No, Amara said. Some people double down instead of backing off. They see admitting error as weakness. As the aircraft descended through layers of clouds, Amara watched the ground rise to meet them. Richmond spread out below, the James River winding through the city like a silver thread. Somewhere down, there was her car in long-term parking, her apartment waiting with its stack of unread reports, her life ready to resume its normal patterns. But normal had shifted today. What should have been a simple flight home had become something else entirely, a crystallizing moment that demanded response. She'd spent her career advocating for fairness in aviation, fighting to make the industry more equitable, more accountable, more conscious of its biases. Now, she had a chance to turn those principles into action. A flight attendant moved through the cabin, checking seatbelts and tray tables. When she reached Amara's row, she paused. Ma'am, when we land, would you be willing to speak with the gate supervisor? There's been a request. Of course, Amara replied. The attendant nodded, relief evident in her expression. Thank you, and I'm sorry for what happened today. All of us are. The plane broke through the final cloud layer, and the airport came into view. Runways stretched across the landscape, marked with lights that guided aircraft safely to ground. From up here, everything looked ordered and purposeful, a carefully designed system where everyone knew their role. But systems were only as good as the people operating them. Rules meant nothing if they weren't enforced. Procedures failed when individuals decided their judgment superseded protocol. And safety, real safety, required more than technical proficiency. It required respect for every person touched by the system. The landing gear deployed with a heavy thunk. The plane's nose tilted downward, the angle of descent increasing. Amara felt the familiar pressure in her ears as altitude decreased rapidly. In the cockpit, Dana's voice came through the headset speakers clearly, walking through the landing checklist with precise professionalism. Elias responded to each item, his voice clipped. The tension between them filled the small space, a storm barely contained. The runway rushed up to meet them. Wheels touched pavement with barely a bump, Dana's skilled hands bringing them down smoothly. The engines reversed thrust with a roar, and the aircraft slowed steadily. Perfect landing technique, textbook execution. As they taxied toward the gate, Elias made his final announcement. Welcome to Richmond, where the local time is 4:15. Thank you for flying with us today, and we hope to see you again soon. Dana said nothing. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. The plane rolled to a stop at the gate. The jetway extended with mechanical precision, connecting aircraft to terminal. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began gathering their belongings with the usual post-flight shuffle. But Amara noticed something unusual. A ground supervisor stood at the jetway door, speaking urgently into a radio. His expression was tense, his eyes scanning the aircraft windows as if searching for someone specific. Marcus gathered his backpack, excitement building now that he was close to seeing his mother. Thanks for talking to me during the flight, he said to Amara. You made it less weird. You're welcome, Amara replied warmly. You're a good kid, Marcus. Don't lose that sense of fairness. The world needs more people who speak up when they see injustice. My mom says the same thing, Marcus said proudly. Passengers began filing toward the exit. Richard Langford collected his briefcase and paused at Amara's row one final time. The ball's in your court now, he said quietly. Whatever you decide, I respect it. But just so you know, that man shouldn't be in command of an aircraft. Not with that attitude. I agree, Amara said simply. As passengers deplaned, the ground supervisor stepped aboard, his eyes immediately finding Amara. His face went pale, color draining so quickly she thought he might faint. He grabbed his radio and spoke rapidly, his voice urgent but too quiet for her to hear. Elias emerged from the cockpit, his swagger fully restored now that the flight was complete. He'd handled the technical aspects of flying without incident. In his mind, that probably meant the day had been a success. He had no idea that his world was about to shift on its axis. The supervisor intercepted Elias before he could walk down the jetway. Captain Barrow, we need you to wait here for a moment. There's a situation that requires your attention. What situation? Elias asked, annoyed. I've got another flight to catch tonight. I don't have time for situations. The supervisor glanced at Amara, who was gathering her things with deliberate slowness. It's regarding a passenger incident that was reported during the flight. For Elias cut himself off, his eyes rolling. Let me guess. Someone complained that I actually enforced boarding procedures. Unbelievable. He shook his head, his confidence unshaken. Fine. Let's get this over with so I can explain how I was just doing my job. Dana appeared behind him, her flight bag slung over her shoulder. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Amara caught the slight nod she gave the supervisor. Dana had already spoken with ground operations. She made sure the airline knew something significant had happened on this flight. The supervisor's radio crackled, and he listened intently to whatever message came through. His eyes widened, and he looked at Amara with something approaching panic. Director Lewis, he said, his voice suddenly formal. Would you be willing to come with me to the operations office? We have a private conference room where we can discuss today's events. The words hung in the air like a bomb with a lit fuse. Elias froze mid-step. His head turned slowly toward Amara, confusion written across his features. Director, he repeated. Director of what? Emma stood, slinging her messenger over her shoulder. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the leather badge case, letting it fall open in her palm. The gold FAA director's credentials caught the cabin lights, gleaming with unmistakable authority. Director of the Federal Aviation Administration, she said calmly, meeting Elias' eyes directly. I believe we have quite a bit to discuss, Captain Barrow. For the first time all day, Elias had absolutely nothing to say. His mouth opened, then closed. His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning horror as the full weight of his mistakes crashed down on him. Marcus, still in the aisle waiting to deplane, let out a quiet whoa. Richard Langford, already halfway down the jetway, turned back with a slight smile. He'd known this moment was coming. He tried to warn Elias with his intervention, tried to give the captain a chance to course correct. But some people only learn through consequences. Dana stepped forward, positioning herself beside Amara. Captain Barrow has a documented history of targeting passengers he deems unworthy of their seats, she said clearly, her voice carrying through the cabin. Today was not an isolated incident. It was a pattern finally catching up with him. The remaining passengers, still in their seats, stared in stunned silence. The woman from row 5 looked like she wanted to disappear. The man who'd apologized earlier watched with grim satisfaction, glad he'd chosen to speak up. Amara looked at the supervisor. Yes, I'll come to the operations office. And I'd like First Officer Whitlock present as well. She has important information to share. Of course, Director Lewis, the supervisor said, his professionalism fighting against his obvious nervousness. This was not the kind of situation covered in standard training. As Amara walked down the aisle toward the exit, Elias finally found his voice. Wait, I didn't know. If I'd known who you were. Amara stopped and turned back to face him. Her expression was calm, but her words cut through the air with surgical precision. That's exactly the problem, Captain. You should treat every passenger with respect regardless of who they are. The fact that you need someone to be important before you'll extend basic dignity tells me everything I need to know about your character. She continued toward the exit, leaving Elias standing frozen in the cabin he'd commanded with such confidence just an hour ago. Behind her, she heard Dana say quietly, I tried to warn you. You wouldn't listen. The jetway felt longer than usual as Amara walked toward the terminal. With each step, she felt the weight of what came next settling onto her shoulders. This wasn't just about one flight or one captain anymore. It was about accountability, about patterns, about using power responsibly to create change. Marcus appeared beside her, walking toward baggage claim. That was amazing, he said, his young voice full of awe. He had no idea. No, he didn't, Amara agreed. But he does now. Behind them, in the aircraft that had carried them all through the clouds and safely back to Earth, Elias Barrow stood alone in the aisle, finally understanding that the flight wasn't over. In many ways, for him, it had just begun. The moment Amara's badge flashed in the cabin light, something shifted in the air itself. The remaining passengers who'd witnessed the reveal stood frozen, some with phones half raised, as if wanting to capture the moment, but thinking better of it. The ground supervisor looked like he might need medical attention, his face cycling between pale shock and flushed panic. Elias remained rooted in place, his earlier swagger completely evaporated. His mouth worked soundlessly, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Finally, he managed, I was just following protocol. No, you weren't, Dana said from behind him, her voice steady and clear. Protocol doesn't involve blocking passengers at gates, questioning validated credentials multiple times, or making pointed announcements designed to humiliate someone. That was personal bias, and everyone on this aircraft knows it. 2 flight attendants emerged from the galley, their earlier nervousness replaced with something that looked like relief. The younger one, whose name tag read Jessica, stepped forward. Director Lewis, we'd like to provide statements as well. This wasn't the first time Captain Barrow has behaved this way toward passengers. The older attendant, Patricia, nodded firmly. We've documented incidents before, but they were dismissed as misunderstandings or personality conflicts. Today felt different. We knew we had to speak up. Amara's expression softened slightly as she looked at the flight attendants. Thank you. Your willingness to come forward matters more than you know. Marcus stood near the exit, his backpack straps clutched in both hands, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. I can tell them what I saw too, he said, his young voice cutting through the tension. He was mean to you for no reason. Everybody saw it. Thank you, Marcus, Amara said warmly. You're very brave. The boy beamed at her words, standing a little straighter. Then his phone buzzed, and he glanced at it. My mom's waiting at baggage claim. Can I go? Of course, Amara replied. Give him all my regards. Tell her she's raising a good man. Marcus grinned and disappeared down the jetway, his footsteps echoing. As he vanished from view, Amara caught sight of Richard Langford waiting just inside the terminal. He'd positioned himself where he could observe without interfering, a witness who understood his role. The ground supervisor cleared his throat nervously. Director Lewis, if you'll follow me, we have a private conference room prepared. Captain Barrow, First Officer Whitlock, you're both requested to attend as well. Elias finally found his voice fully, though it came out higher than usual. This is a misunderstanding. If I'd known who she was. Stop talking, Dana interrupted sharply. Please just stop. You're making it worse. But Elias couldn't help himself. The words tumbled out, desperate and defensive. I treat all passengers equally. I was ensuring security. It's my responsibility as captain to verify boarding credentials when something seems unusual. And what seemed unusual about me, Captain? Amara asked, her tone dangerously calm. Be specific. Elias opened his mouth, then closed it. Whatever answer formed in his mind, he was smart enough to realize it would only dig the hole deeper. His silence spoke volumes. That's what I thought, Amara said. She turned to the supervisor. Lead the way. As they walked through the terminal, Amara noticed the stairs. Word had spread quickly through airport staff. Ground crew members whispered to each other, their eyes following her progress. A gate agent grabbed her colleague's arm, pointing discreetly. The FAA director wasn't someone who typically appeared unannounced at regional airports, and certainly not as a passenger on a flight where the captain had just made a catastrophic error in judgment. Richard fell into step beside Amara as they walked. I've already contacted my attorney, he said quietly. She's drafting a witness statement, and I've reached out to 3 board members at other airlines. They'll want to know about this. You work fast, Amara observed. I've been in aviation long enough to know when something significant is happening, Richard replied. This story will spread through the industry by morning. Better to get ahead of it with facts. The conference room was small and windowless, with a rectangular table and 8 chairs. A water pitcher sat in the center, condensation beating on its surface. The supervisor gestured for everyone to sit, then stationed himself by the door as if worried someone might try to escape. Amara took a seat at the head of the table and set her badge case on the surface where everyone could see it. The gold credentials caught the fluorescent lighting, impossible to ignore. Dana sat to her right, posture straight and professional. Elias hesitated before taking a seat across from them, as far from Amara as the table allowed. Before we begin, Amara said, pulling out her phone, I want to be clear about something. This conversation will be documented. I'm recording audio for the record. Does anyone object? No one spoke. Elias looked like he wanted to object, but couldn't figure out how to do so without appearing guilty. Amara pressed record and set the phone on the table. This is Dr. Amara Lewis, Director of the Federal Aviation Administration. Present are Captain Elias Barrow, First Officer Dana Whitlock, and Airport Operations Supervisor. She paused, looking at the supervisor. Thomas Green, he supplied nervously. Thomas Green, Amara continued. We're here to discuss events that occurred on Flight 447 from Montreal to Richmond on today's date. Captain Barrow, I'm going to ask you some questions. You're not required to answer, but your responses or lack thereof will be part of the official record. Elias shifted in his seat, his hands clasped tightly on the table. I think I should have union representation before answering questions. That's your right, Amara acknowledged. However, I'm not conducting an employment investigation. I'm gathering information about potential violations of federal aviation regulations regarding passenger treatment and crew conduct. Whether you answer now or later, these questions will be asked. She pulled out her notebook, flipping to a page filled with her careful documentation. Let's start simple. How many VIP passengers boarded through the priority line today? Elias frowned, caught off guard by the straightforward question. I don't know. Several. Approximately how many? Amara pressed. Maybe 5 or 6. And how many of those passengers did you personally stop and question about their boarding status? The trap was obvious now, but Elias had no escape route. Just one. Me, Amara stated flatly. Out of 6 VIP passengers, I was the only one whose credentials you questioned. Can you explain why? Elias' jaw worked. Your boarding pass seemed. I thought there might be an error in the system. What about my boarding pass suggested an error? Amara asked. It scanned properly at the gate. The agent confirmed it. What specifically made you suspicious? Silence stretched between them. Elias stared at his hands, unable or unwilling to articulate what they both knew. Nothing about her boarding pass had seemed wrong. Only her appearance had triggered his suspicion. Dana leaned forward, her voice cutting through the tension. I can answer that question if Captain Barrow won't. I've flown with him for 2 years. I've seen him stop and question passengers before, always with the same justification about maintaining standards. And I've noticed a pattern in which passengers receive that extra scrutiny. Dana, don't, Elias said, his voice pleading now rather than commanding. I have to, Dana replied, meeting his eyes with steady resolve. I should have spoken up sooner. I told myself it wasn't my place, that maybe I was reading too much into things. But today made it clear. This isn't about security or protocol. It's about bias. Amara turned to Dana. You mentioned a pattern. Can you elaborate? Dana pulled out her phone and opened a document. I started keeping notes 6 months ago after a particularly troubling incident. Captain Barrow stopped a Hispanic family in first class, insisting their tickets must be wrong because they were dressed too casually. It turned out the father was a tech executive whose company had paid for the upgrades. She scrolled through her notes. 3 months ago, an elderly black woman with a VIP pass was questioned so extensively she missed the flight. A month later, a young Asian businessman was asked repeatedly if he was sure he could afford the seat. Each time, Captain Barrow claimed he was just being thorough. Those are completely different situations, Elias protested. I was checking for ticket fraud. It happens all the time. Does it? Amara asked. Because according to industry statistics, ticket fraud at airport gates is extremely rare. Most fraud is detected during online booking or at check-in kiosks. By the time someone reaches the gate with a scanned boarding pass, the system has already validated them multiple times. She pulled up data on her own phone. Last year, out of tens of millions of passengers, fewer than 200 cases of boarding pass fraud were detected at gates nationwide. That's a success rate of 99.9999% for the automated systems. So why did you feel the need to override that system specifically for me? The question hung in the air, unanswerable without admitting the truth Elias desperately wanted to avoid. His face had gone red, whether from shame or anger, Amara couldn't tell. Probably both. I want to be clear about something, Amara continued, her voice measured and professional. This isn't about revenge or humiliation. This is about accountability. Every person who steps onto an aircraft deserves to be treated with dignity and respect regardless of how they look, what they're wearing, or what assumptions a crew member might make. She looked directly at Elias. You made a series of choices today, Captain. You chose to block my path at the gate. You chose to question my credentials repeatedly. You chose to make announcements designed to embarrass me in front of other passengers. Each of those choices violated not just airline policy, but the fundamental principle that aviation serves everyone equally. Thomas Green, the supervisor, had been taking notes frantically. Director Lewis, I want to assure you that this airline takes all passenger complaints seriously. We have strict policies against discrimination. Do you? Amara asked, turning her attention to him. Because according to First Officer Whitlock, complaints have been filed before. What happened to them? Green's pen stopped moving. I'm not directly involved in complaint resolution. That's handled by our passenger relations department. Who answers to whom? Amara pressed. Where do those complaints go? Are there investigations? Reviews of crew conduct? Or do they get filed away with a standardized apology letter and perhaps a flight voucher? The supervisor's silence was answer enough. Dana spoke up again. I filed a formal concern 8 months ago about Captain Barrow's conduct toward passengers. I was told it would be reviewed by a crew oversight committee. I never heard anything back. When I followed up, I was told the matter had been resolved internally. Resolve how? Amara asked. No idea, dan replied. There is no investigation that I'm aware of. No interview with me about what I'd witnessed. Nothing changed. Amara made notes on her phone, her expression hardening. This wasn't just about one pilot's behavior. It was about institutional failure, about systems that protected employees over passengers, about complaints that disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. Captain Barrow, Amara said, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. I want you to think carefully before answering, because your responses will be part of the official FAA record. Elias nodded slowly, his earlier defiance completely gone. First question, did you verify anyone else's VIP boarding status today, besides mine? No, Elias admitted quietly. Second question, what specifically about my appearance or behavior made my credentials seem suspicious to you? Elias stared at the table. Seconds ticked past in silence. Finally, barely audible, he said, nothing specific, just instinct. Instinct, Amara repeated. And what does your instinct tell you about other passengers? The businessman in the expensive suit? The elderly white woman with her knitting? Do they trigger your instinct, or does it only activate for certain people? Elias didn't answer. Third question, Amara continued. If you had known I was the FAA director, would your tone and behavior have been different? Yes, Elias said, then seemed to realize how damning the admission was. I mean, I would have shown appropriate respect for your position, but not appropriate respect for me as a paying passenger with valid credentials, Amara said. That's the distinction, Captain. You believe respect should be reserved for people you deem important enough to deserve it. Everyone else has to earn it by meeting your unspoken standards. She leaned back in her chair, letting the weight of her words settle. Here's what's going to happen. I'm recommending a comprehensive review of this airline's passenger treatment protocols and complaint resolution procedures. The FAA will conduct an independent investigation into today's events. Thomas Green paled. An FAA investigation? Yes, Amara confirmed. We take civil rights violations in aviation very seriously. Additionally, I'll be recommending mandatory bias training for all crew members, not just at this airline, but industry-wide. What happened today exposed systemic problems that go far beyond one flight. She turned to Dana. First Officer Whitlock, your integrity and professionalism today were exemplary. You tried repeatedly to check Captain Barrow's behavior. You documented concerns. You spoke truth even when it was uncomfortable. That's the kind of leadership aviation needs. Dana's eyes glistened, but she blinked back tears. Thank you, Director Lewis. I only wish I'd spoken up sooner. You're speaking now, Amara said gently. That's what matters. And your testimony will ensure this pattern doesn't continue. Elias finally looked up, his face haggard. What happens to me? That's not my decision, Amara replied. The airline will conduct its own internal review. But I can tell you that your actions today violated federal regulations regarding passenger treatment. There will be consequences, both from the airline and potentially from the FAA. She paused, studying him carefully. I want you to understand something, Captain. This isn't about destroying your career. It's about preventing you from destroying anyone else's dignity. Every time you make assumptions about passengers based on their appearance, you tell them they don't belong. You reinforce systems of exclusion that aviation has fought for decades to dismantle. Her voice softened slightly, though it lost none of its authority. You're not a bad person, Captain Barrow, but you have biases you haven't examined, and those biases affect how you treat people. That's not acceptable in a position of authority, especially one where people's safety and comfort depend on you. Elias nodded slowly, something breaking in his expression. It wasn't quite remorse yet, but it was the beginning of understanding. I never thought of it that way, he said quietly. I just thought I was doing my job. That's the problem, Amara replied. You thought your job was to police who belongs in certain spaces. Your actual job is to fly the aircraft safely and treat every passenger with equal respect. Today, you failed at the second part. A knock at the door interrupted them. Thomas Green opened it to reveal a woman in a business suit, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes sharp with intelligence. I'm Jennifer Howard, senior counsel for the airline. I was contacted about a situation requiring legal presence. Come in, Amara said. We're just finishing up. Jennifer entered, taking in the scene quickly. The FAA director's badge on the table, Elias' defeated posture, Dana's rigid professionalism. The supervisors barely contained panic. She'd clearly been briefed on the basics, because her first words were, Director Lewis, on behalf of the airline, I want to apologize for your experience today. I don't want an apology crafted by lawyers, Amara said bluntly. I want concrete action, policy changes, real oversight, a system where complaints like First Officer Whitlock's don't disappear into bureaucratic limbo. Jennifer nodded, pulling out a tablet. We're prepared to conduct a thorough review of all protocols. Captain Barrow will be placed on administrative leave pending investigation. We take these matters very seriously. Do you? Amara asked. Because according to the evidence I've gathered, this airline has taken complaints seriously by filing them away and hoping they'd be forgotten. That stops now. She stood, gathering her belongings. I'll be submitting a formal report to the FAA within 48 hours. I expect full cooperation from the airline in any subsequent investigation. First Officer Whitlock will be protected from any retaliation. Any attempt to punish her for speaking truthfully will result in additional federal scrutiny. Jennifer made notes rapidly. Understood, Director Lewis. Amara looked at Elias one final time. You asked what happens next. Here's my answer. You have a choice. You can deny everything, blame others, claim you're just following protocol. That path leads nowhere good. Or you can acknowledge what happened, examine your biases, and work to become better. That's the harder path, but it's the only one that leads to redemption. She picked up her badge case and slipped it back in her pocket. Aviation demands excellence from everyone involved. That includes treating every passenger with dignity. I hope you'll remember that going forward. Without waiting for a response, Amara walked to the door. Dana stood quickly, following her. Thomas Green practically stumbled over himself to open the door for them. As they stepped into the corridor, Amara heard Elias speak one last time, his voice hollow. I am sorry. She paused, but didn't turn around. Don't apologize to me, Captain. Apologize to every passenger you've ever made feel unwelcome in a space they had every right to occupy. Apologize to your crew for putting them in positions where they had to choose between their conscience and their careers. And then do better. The door closed behind them, sealing Elias in the conference room with Jennifer and Thomas, where the real consequences of his choices would begin. In the corridor, Dana let out a long breath. Thank you for standing up not just for yourself, but for all of us who've witnessed this behavior and felt powerless to stop it. You weren't powerless, Amara said. You documented everything. You spoke truth. That takes tremendous courage. Don't diminish what you did today. Richard Langford appeared at the end of the corridor, his timing impeccable as always. How did it go? Exactly as it needed to, Amara replied. Change is uncomfortable, but it's necessary. The three of them walked toward the terminal exit, where normal airport life continued around them. Families reunited at baggage claim. Business travelers rushed to make connections. The ordinary rhythms of aviation carried on, indifferent to the small revolution that had just occurred in a windowless conference room. But Amara knew that ripples from today would spread far beyond this airport. Stories would be told. Policies would change. Crew members would think twice before making assumptions about passengers based on appearance. The sky had rules, and those rules existed for everyone. Today, Captain Elias Barrow had learned that lesson the hard way, and the rest of the aviation industry was about to learn it too. By the time Amara reached her apartment that evening, the video had already begun its viral journey across the internet. Someone had posted the footage from a gate, showing Elias blocking her path, his condescending smile, his theatrical inspection of her credentials. The caption was simple. Pilot questions black woman's right to board first class. Wait for the ending. The video had been viewed 300,000 times in 4 hours. By morning, that number would multiply tenfold. Amara watched it once on her phone, seeing herself through the camera's eye. Calm, composed, refusing to be diminished by Elias' assumptions. She looked exactly like what she was a woman who knew her worth and wouldn't apologize for occupying space she'd earned. The comment section was a battlefield. Some praised her dignity under pressure. Others questioned why she hadn't immediately shown her credentials. A few insisted the whole thing was overblown, that Elias had just been doing his job. But the dominant narrative was clear. People recognized injustice when they saw it, and this video captured it perfectly. Hashtags multiplied across social media platforms. Hashtag #TheEyePaulBlack trended alongside hashtag #RespectTheDirector and hashtag FlyingWhileJudged. Aviation industry forums lit up with debates. Current and former flight attendants shared their own stories of witnessing pilot bias. Passengers came forward with similar experiences, their voices finally finding an audience. Amara's phone rang constantly. Her deputy called with updates on media requests. Dozens of outlets wanted interviews. Her press secretary wanted to schedule a statement. The Secretary of Transportation left a voicemail offering full support. Even the White House Communications Office reached out, asking if she needed assistance managing the story. She declined them all. The video spoke for itself, and silence sometimes carried more power than words. Let people draw their own conclusions. Let the aviation industry reckon with what the footage revealed. Her job wasn't to perform for cameras, but to ensure the system changed. Late that night, as the video passed 2 million views, Amara received an unexpected email. The sender was Elias Barrow. The subject line read simply, "No excuses." She hesitated before opening it, unsure what to expect. An attack? A legal threat? More justifications wrapped in corporate language? Instead, she found something different. "Director Lewis, I've watched the video 17 times tonight. Each viewing makes me more ashamed. I see my face, my tone, my certainty that I was right. I see a man who thought his authority gave him permission to judge who belongs where. I was that man. Maybe I still am, but I don't want to be anymore. I know apologies don't fix what I did. I know I can't undo the humiliation I caused you or the pattern of behavior I've demonstrated over years. But I want you to know I'm starting counseling tomorrow. I've enrolled in bias training. I'm reading everything I can find about systemic racism in professional spaces. This isn't about saving my career. It's about becoming someone I can respect when I look in the mirror. Thank you for holding me accountable. I needed to face consequences I've avoided for too long. Elias Barrow." Amara read the email twice, searching for insincerity or self-serving manipulation. She found neither. The words rang with genuine remorse, the kind that came from truly seeing oneself for the first time. It didn't erase what happened, didn't absolve Elias of responsibility, but it suggested the possibility of growth, which was more than many people achieved after being confronted with their biases. She didn't reply. Elias' journey toward change was his own to navigate. Her role had been to create accountability, not to grant absolution. The next morning, the airline held a press conference. Jennifer Howard stood at a podium flanked by the company's CEO, a white man in his 60s named Martin Caldwell, and their head of diversity and inclusion, a black woman named Vanessa Price. The optics were carefully managed, but the content surprised Amara as she watched from her office. Yesterday's incident on Flight 447 represents a fundamental failure, Martin began, his voice heavy with what seemed like genuine remorse. Not just the failure of one employee, but the failure of our systems, our training, and our oversight. We allowed complaints to be buried. We dismissed patterns as personality conflicts. We prioritized operational efficiency over passenger dignity. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. That ends today. We're implementing immediate changes. Every crew member will undergo comprehensive bias training, facilitated by outside experts. We're establishing an independent passenger advocacy office with direct reporting to the board of directors. And we're conducting a full review of every complaint filed in the past 5 years to identify patterns we should have addressed long ago. Vanessa Price stepped forward. I want to speak directly to passengers who've experienced discrimination while flying. Your complaints matter. Your experiences are valid. We failed you by not creating systems where you felt safe reporting mistreatment. We're changing that. A hotline will be established by end of week, staffed by trained advocates who will ensure every complaint receives genuine investigation. The press conference continued for 40 minutes, fielding questions about Elias' employment status, administrative leave pending investigation, and about whether the changes would extend beyond one airline. Jennifer Howard confirmed they were working with industry partners to develop unified standards, acknowledging that discrimination wasn't limited to their company. Dana Whitlock appeared at the conference, introduced as an example of the courage they wanted to encourage in all employees. She spoke briefly but powerfully about the importance of speaking up, of refusing to accept behavior that violated core values. "I stayed silent too long," she admitted. "I told myself it wasn't my place to challenge a captain's authority. But silence enables harm. I should have spoken up sooner." Her honesty resonated. By afternoon, Dana's portion of the press conference had been clipped and shared widely, praised for its authenticity. Aviation forums discussed her extensively, with many pilots, particularly women and minorities, sharing how her words validated their own experiences, challenging authority when necessary. Richard Langford used his influence strategically. He contacted colleagues at major airlines, aviation insurance companies, and pilot training organizations. Within 72 hours, he'd helped convene an industry working group focused on passenger treatment standards. His pitch was simple. Discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was expensive. Lawsuits, settlements, reputation damage, and lost customers cost airlines millions annually. Addressing bias wasn't charity, it was smart business. The working group scheduled its first meeting for the following month, with participation from the FAA, airline executives, pilot unions, and civil rights organizations. Amara would co-chair, lending federal authority to the initiative. Real change moved slowly, but the machinery was now in motion. Marcus sent Amara a text message 3 days after the flight. "My mom saw the video. She says you handled it like a boss. She also says I can visit FAA headquarters anytime. Can we set that up?" Amara smiled at her phone, typing a quick reply. "Absolutely. I'll have my assistant reach out to your mom to schedule. Looking forward to showing you around." She thought about Marcus often, about his instinctive recognition of injustice, his refusal to accept behavior others dismissed as normal. He represented hope, a generation learning early to question assumptions, to speak up for fairness, to see people rather than stereotypes. If aviation could nurture that perspective, the industry would be better for it. The viral video eventually slowed its spread, replaced by news stories and controversies. But its impact lingered. Flight crews became more conscious of their language and assumptions. Passengers felt more empowered to report mistreatment. Airlines updated policies with genuine urgency rather than performative gestures. 3 weeks after the incident, Amara attended an aviation safety conference where she was scheduled to deliver a keynote address. As she walked through the convention center, people approach her constantly. Some offer support, others to share their own stories of discrimination in professional spaces. A young black woman training to be a pilot thanked her for making the industry safer. An older white captain admitted he'd never considered how his assumptions might affect passengers until seeing the video. But the most meaningful conversation happened in a quiet corner of the exhibition hall, where Dana Whitlock stood examining a display about new navigation technology. She'd been invited to the conference as a speaker, her profile rising in the industry as an example of principled leadership. "Director Lewis," Dana said when she noticed Amara approaching, "I wanted to thank you again. The airline promoted me to chief training pilot for crew professionalism. They're building an entire department around passenger relations, and I get to help design the training programs." "That's wonderful," Amara replied genuinely. "You earned it through courage and integrity. Those qualities make great leaders." Dana's eyes shone with emotion. "I spent 2 years watching Elias treat passengers poorly, telling myself it wasn't my responsibility to intervene. Then you showed me what real strength looks like, maintaining dignity under attack, refusing to diminish yourself, holding power accountable without cruelty. I want to teach that kind of leadership." They talked for 20 minutes about the training programs Dana envisioned, about how to help crew members recognize their biases before those biases harm passengers. Dana's enthusiasm was infectious, her commitment clear. She transformed from a silent witness to an active change agent, using her experience to prevent future harm. 6 months after Flight 447, Amara stood in the FAA headquarters auditorium, addressing an assembly of aviation professionals gathered for the launch of new passenger rights initiatives. The room held airline executives, pilot union representatives, flight attendant associations, and civil rights advocates. The energy was different than usual conferences, focused, urgent, committed. Aviation has always been about pushing boundaries, Amara began, her voice carrying clearly through the space. We conquered distance, speed, and altitude. We made the impossible routine. But technological advancement means nothing if we can't also advance how we treat each other at 30,000 feet. She outlined the new initiatives: mandatory bias recognition training for all crew members, standardized complaint procedures across airlines, passenger advocacy offices with independent oversight, and enhanced protections for employees who reported discriminatory behavior. The regulations had teeth. Airlines failing to comply would face significant fines and increased federal scrutiny. These changes didn't emerge from bureaucratic planning, Amara continued. They came from lived experience, from passengers who were questioned, doubted, and diminished because someone made assumptions based on appearance, from crew members who witnessed problems but lacked systems to address them effectively. And yes, from one flight where multiple failures converged to create a teachable moment for an entire industry. She never mentioned Elias by name. The story had moved beyond individual actors to systemic solutions. What mattered now was preventing future incidents, not relitigating past ones. After the presentation, Marcus arrived with his mother, Captain LaToya Williams, still in her Army uniform. Amara had invited them to tour FAA headquarters as promised. Marcus' excitement was palpable as she showed them through air traffic control simulators, safety testing laboratories, and the Emergency Response Coordination Center. "This is so cool," Marcus breathed, watching technicians test flight recorder data. "I want to work here someday." "Then work toward it," Amara encouraged. "Study hard. Stay curious. Never let anyone convince you that you don't belong somewhere you've earned the right to be." LaToya pulled Amara aside while Marcus was absorbed in examining an aircraft engine display. "Thank you for what you did," she said quietly. "Not just for yourself, but for my son. He talks about you constantly. You showed him that dignity and strength aren't contradictory, that you can stand up for yourself without losing composure or humanity." "He was brave that day, too," Amara replied. "He recognized injustice and spoke up. That takes character many adults never develop." "He learned it from watching people like you," LaToya said. "Every time someone with power uses it responsibly, they create a template for the next generation. You're shaping how Marcus will lead when it's his turn." The tour ended at Amara's office, where she gave Marcus a FAA patch and a signed photo of a Boeing 787. "Keep these," she told him. "And when you're ready to apply for internships or jobs here, you reach out. I want to see you succeed." Marcus hugged her impulsively, then seemed embarrassed by his enthusiasm. Amara smiled. "Never apologize for showing genuine emotion. The world needs more of it, not less." That evening, Amara attended a quiet dinner hosted by Richard Langford at his home. Dana was there, along with several airline executives who championed the industry reforms. The gathering was celebration and strategy session combined, people who'd worked hard for change, taking a moment to acknowledge progress while planning next steps. "The industry working group is exceeding expectations," Richard reported over wine and appetizers. "We've got participation from 80% of major carriers. Even the holdouts are coming around. They see the liability risks of ignoring these issues." Dana shared updates on training implementation. "We've trained over 15,000 crew members so far. The feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. People want to do better. They just need frameworks and language to recognize their biases." Conversation flowed naturally, these disparate people united by shared purpose. Amara listened more than she spoke, grateful for allies who turned one difficult flight into catalyst for meaningful reform. As the evening wound down, Dana approached Amara privately. "I heard something today. Elias completed his counseling and bias training. He's requested to return to flying, but only as first officer, not captain. He says he needs more time learning before he's ready to lead again." "That's wise of him," Amara said. "Recognizing your limitations is often the first step toward overcoming them." "Do you think people can really change?" Dana asked. "After years of thinking one way, can they genuinely become better?" Amara considered the question carefully. "Some people can. Not everyone. Some are too invested in their biases to examine them honestly. But people who truly face their failures, who do the hard work of understanding how their actions affected others, they can grow. Whether Elias is one of those people, time will tell." Several weeks later, Amara received an invitation to speak at an aviation diversity conference. The organizers wanted her to share her experience from Flight 447, to put a human face on the regulatory changes sweeping the industry. She accepted, understanding that personal stories often move people more effectively than policy discussions. The conference was held in Chicago, drawing aviation professionals from across the country. Amara stood backstage, hearing the murmur of the assembled crowd. The moderator introduced her with extensive credentials: FAA director, former aerospace engineer, advocate for safety and equity in aviation. But when Amara walked on stage, she began differently than expected. "6 months ago, I got on a plane dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, tired from a conference, just wanting to get home. I had a valid boarding pass, proper credentials, every right to be in the seat I'd been assigned. But someone looked at me and decided I didn't belong." This is my story, but it's also the story of countless people who face similar assumptions every day. She spoke for 20 minutes about the flight, about Elias' behavior, about Dana's courage, about Marcus' witness, about Richard's support. She described the conference room confrontation, the viral videos spread, the changes that followed. Her tone remained measured, factual, focused on systems rather than individuals. "This isn't about villainizing one captain," she concluded. "It's about recognizing patterns, addressing biases, and building systems that protect everyone's dignity. Captain Barrow made mistakes, but he's also working to correct them. That journey deserves acknowledgement, even as we maintain accountability for past actions." The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. Afterward, people lined up to speak with her, sharing stories, asking questions, expressing gratitude for speaking truth about experiences many had endured silently. A young black woman, maybe 25, approached near the end. "I'm in pilot training," she said nervously. "Sometimes instructors treat me like I'm less capable than white students, like I'm only there because of diversity initiatives. Hearing your story helps me remember I belong in that cockpit because I've earned it, not because anyone gave me special treatment." "You're exactly right," Amara told her. "Don't let anyone's assumptions become your internal narrative. You belong wherever your skills, dedication, and qualifications take you." Months continued passing. The changes became embedded in industry practice. Airlines reported improved passenger satisfaction scores. Complaint rates increased initially, not because problems worsened, but because passengers finally trusted reporting systems. Many complaints were resolved quickly through new advocacy channels, preventing escalation. Elias returned to flying as a first officer, paired with a captain known for mentoring and patience. Reports suggested he was humble, attentive, and careful in his interactions with passengers. Whether his change was permanent remained to be seen, but the trajectory was encouraging. Dana thrived in her new role, becoming a respected voice on crew professionalism. She spoke at conferences, advised airlines on policy development, and mentored young aviators navigating industry challenges. Her story, from silent witness to active leader, inspired others to find their courage. A year after Flight 447, Amara boarded another flight, this one to Seattle for a safety conference. She arrived at the gate in casual clothes again, her badge tucked in her bag. The gate agent smiled warmly, scanning her priority boarding pass without question. The captain stood at the aircraft door, greeting passengers with genuine friendliness. "Welcome aboard," he said to Amara, his tone professionally courteous. "Thank you for flying with us today." She smiled and moved to her seat. The flight was uneventful, exactly as it should be. No one questioned her presence. No announcements carried hidden barbs. She was simply another passenger in a system that, imperfectly but increasingly, treated everyone with baseline respect. As the plane lifted into the sky, Amara looked out her window at clouds stretching endlessly. Aviation had always represented possibility, the ability to transcend limitations, to connect distant places, to dream beyond boundaries. That promise should extend to everyone, regardless of who they were or how they looked. The fight for that vision wasn't finished. Bias persisted, assumptions continued, inequity remained embedded in structures and practices. But progress was real. Systems were changing. People were learning. And every flight that treated passengers with equal dignity moved the industry closer to its stated ideals. Amara pulled out her phone and sent a text to Marcus. In the air again. "Smooth flight, respectful crew, exactly how it should be. Keep working toward your dreams. The skies are getting friendlier." His response came quickly. "Can't wait to be up there with you someday." She smiled, tucking her phone away. The future of aviation sat in school somewhere, studying and dreaming, preparing for a career in skies that people like her were working to make more just. That legacy, helping create space for the next generation to thrive, mattered more than any title or position. Outside her window, the earth curved beneath clouds. Up here, the sky belonged to everyone who had the courage to reach for it. And down below, the work continued, turning that possibility into reality, one flight, one policy, one changed mind at a time. Dignity took flight too. It rose on the same air that lifted aircraft, powered by the same determination that conquered gravity. And like aviation itself, it required constant attention, continuous improvement, and unwavering commitment to the principle that everyone deserved respect in spaces they had every right to occupy. The plane leveled at cruising altitude. Amara closed her eyes, feeling the familiar hum of engines, and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The work wasn't done, but it was underway. And that, she thought, was exactly what progress looked like. Like and subscribe for more stories about courage, justice, and the power of standing your ground.